Here, and then we'll have our panelists come up and move forward from there. Okay, any other questions before we get started? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter, who's going to MC our morning session here.
Well, good morning, everyone, and happy America Recycles Day. Welcome to the 2019 Recycle Summit. I'm Peter Wright, the Assistant Administrator for EPA's Office of Land and Emergency Management, and I'm very pleased to be here and pleased that you're with us. It is an honor to be surrounded by so many dedicated professionals and leaders from across the recycling system. It was just 1 year ago today that 45 of us gathered together in this very room to celebrate the signing of the America Recycles Pledge and the kickoff of a year-long series of collaborative events. We've made a lot of progress, and we look forward to today's summit, where we'll hear the fruits of the efforts of the past year, and we'll continue forward, and what we're going to do to continue to move forward over the course of the next year. So it's my extreme pleasure and privilege to be able to introduce to you the Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Mr. Andrew Wheeler.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for joining us today. America has a long-standing commitment to conservation and environmental stewardship. As a nation, we are blessed with abundant resources, and we know it is our responsibility to maximize those resources today so that future generations will have them for many years to come. Recycling is one of the most widely available ways that all Americans can help conserve valuable materials and prevent them from reaching our nation's landfills. When EPA began in 1970, 49 years ago, side note, we are celebrating our 50th anniversary next year, the national recycling rate was less than 10%. In 1980, the first curbside recycling program was launched in Woodbury, New Jersey. And today, recycling programs can be found in communities large and small all across the country. As a result, the national recycling rate has grown to more than 35%. In 2020, when we celebrate our 50th anniversary, we will celebrate the progress we have made over the decades. We also recognize, though, that we still have much to accomplish. That is why last year, EPA held our first American Recycle Summit, which brought together stakeholders from across the recycling system to sign the American Recycling Pledge. Gathered in this room today are some of the most innovative, forward-thinking organizations working to solve key challenges in the recycling system. I'm pleased to say that together over the past year, we've taken many important steps. We've more than tripled the number of pledge signatories from 45 to more than 170. We also have a wealth of efforts underway to enhance public education and outreach, increase our investment in recycling infrastructure, develop markets for recycled materials, and improve measurement and data collection. Today, EPA is proud to release the National Framework for Advancing the U.S. Recycling System, which summarizes our accomplishments over the past year and recommends actions for 2020. Our recycling system is still facing significant challenges that require sustained efforts to build a stronger, more resilient system. On Wednesday, I toured the Fairfax County Recycling and Disposal Center, where I saw firsthand the challenges that we face when a recycling system is contaminated. As I was touring the facility, a plastic bag, actually multiple plastic bags, got caught in the machinery, and everything came to a halt while the workers dislodged the equipment. Not everyone realizes that improper sorting at the consumer level can work counter to our efforts to recycle in the first place. We need to do a better job, collective job, of educating the American public. Earlier this morning, I hosted a dialogue with executives from across the recycling system to discuss their actions and commitments. We discussed investing in recycling infrastructure and stimulating markets in the United States. We also discussed what future actions will be needed to implement the framework. I reiterated EPA's commitment to leveraging our collective resources and expertise to strengthen the U.S. recycling system. But I recognize that this collaboration is most effective when there are common goals. That's why today I'm announcing the EPA's intent to develop national goals with underlying metrics to measure success along the entire value chain. Goals give us something to aspire to, and national recycling goals will encourage people across the U.S. to recycle more and to recycle correctly. Let me be clear, I recognize that establishing goals will not be a simple task, but I am confident that by working together and with public input, we will celebrate milestone success when we reconvene this summit next year. We have a tremendous American Recyclers Week so far. with events taking place all across America. As part of our Veterans Day activities, EPA highlighted veterans who are making positive contributions to the U.S. recycling industry. Keep America Beautiful recognized a national recycling hero at Veterans Day events at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, the largest Army military installation in the nation with a waste diversion rate of almost 60%. On Tuesday, we celebrated the role that data and measurement plays in strengthening the U.S. recycling system, marking the 25th anniversary of EPA's WasteWise Voluntary Partnership Program. WasteWise works with organizations and businesses to achieve greater sustainability through goal setting, data tracking, and reporting. This year, we held our first ever Innovation Fair, which many of you attended. I'd like to especially thank our co-sponsors of the fair, the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, Keep America Beautiful, the Solid Waste Association of North America, and the Recycling Partnership. Exhibitors showcased their innovative efforts across the recycling system, including research, education and outreach, new technologies and processes, and recycled content products. It was a terrific event that over 200 people attended. How many people here today attended yesterday's Innovation Fair? Great. If you noticed, we had a lot of exhibits packed into a small space. Next year, we will be in a larger space for the second technology fair. Finally, at today's summit, we will hear from the America Recycles Work Group Steering Committee members on their substantial progress over the last year in 4 key areas: promoting education and outreach, enhancing infrastructure, strengthening secondary materials markets, and enhancing measurements. I look forward to hearing about their progress. EPA has undertaken or plans to undertake several actions during 2019 and 2020 to advance the recycling system as outlined in the framework. EPA will soon finalize a streamlined system for managing hazardous waste aerosol cans that is clear, practical, and protective and promotes recycling. This rule will add aerosol cans to the list of materials that can be managed under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act's Universal Waste Management System. The simplified structure will help improve regulatory compliance, make aerosol can collection more economical, and facilitate the environmentally sound recycling of this common waste stream. We estimate that this change will save at least $5.3 million per year in regulatory costs and benefit approximately 25,000 facilities across numerous industries, including the retail, construction, and manufacturing sectors. I'm proud of the solid foundation built by the career staff, not only over the last year, but over the decades here at EPA on the America's Recycles initiative. During our next year, our EPA regions will play a vital role as the American Recycles work expands beyond the country. I will now hand the mic back to Peter Wright, the Assistant Administrator for EPA's Office of Land and Emergency Management, to introduce our next speaker, who will offer the regional perspective. I want to thank you all today. I'm going to have to be in and out, but I'm going to try to stay here as long as I can to hear all the presentations. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm proud of the solid foundation that has been built over the past year for the America Recycles work that has taken place here at EPA headquarters. But during our next year, and actually it was true even this past year, EPA regions have done much work to support recycling across America. And over the next year, our EPA's regions will continue to have a vital role as the America Recycles work expands across the country. So I'm particularly honored here today to introduce my colleague, Region 2 Administrator Pete Lopez, who has already hit the ground running as the new regional lead for the Resource Conservation and Recovery Program. Pete has a keen interest in the topic of promoting waste diversion and recycling in Region 2 and nationally. As a former New York State legislator, Pete was instrumental in the development of solid waste programs in his district and statewide. So with his experience, Pete brings very important knowledge, of how waste management and recycling works at a regional level and is uniquely poised to assist EPA in our overall efforts to improve America's recycling system. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Pete Lopez to make some remarks.
Well, thank you for that gracious introduction. And I want to thank Administrator Wheeler and Peter Wright for hosting this incredible gathering. And some time ago, the administrator and I spoke about regional priorities, and he and I chatted a bit about what are the challenges, what are the opportunities that we see as we do our work across the nation. And I mentioned recycling in passing, and his eyes lit up. And to his credit, he has now provided the leadership that has brought us here together on this critical issue. I had a chance to kind of wander around with him a little bit and Peter Wright yesterday at the Innovation Fair, and the energy in the room was palpable. The energy, the enthusiasm, the common interest in being here. And to that extent, it's clear that this effort has struck a responsive chord. And that chord manifests itself not just within industry, not just within academia or not-for-profits, but also into our homes and families. Everyone is affected here. Everyone has an interest in being part of this equation. And the administrator and I share some common background in terms of our interest in the conservation and the issues of always leaving a place better than how we found it. And that's our training, that's our discipline, that's our passion, and that's what assembles us here together. So as we proceed, the other thing that we see at the regional level, and this is an ethic I think all of us appreciate, that you can achieve environmental benefits and still manage for economic benefits, still manage for quality of life, still manage for community benefits. And so that's part of our engagement here. And at the regional level, our focus is how do we put those pieces together? How can we, and I use the analogy of the regions very similar to I would look at New York State and counties, where counties are basically the service delivery vehicle. We bring program policy guidance from, in this case, from the federal level. We help implement it. And then we also work at the ground level to understand how do those programs and policies work. And understandably, they're only as effective as the extent to which they can penetrate into the community, where they resonate, where we see meaningful transformational change. One thing that I've experienced, and again, working at the regional level, and we have this crisis in the Caribbean, and that's part of the region that I serve. We have the islands of Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands struggling with their solid waste management equation. And again, with the administrator's support, we are helping provide hands-on technical assistance. We're using supplemental funds from Congress to build an infrastructure there that can help them administer. So part of the equation, and this is part of the regional engagement, is that, and we heard that today with some of our colleagues in the roundtable, that not all communities are created equal. Not all businesses are created equal. And so it requires an understanding of what's happening in your backyard, immersion, knowing the partners, knowing their strengths, knowing their weaknesses, and finding a way to facilitate and bring people together. So we want to be able to again, administer and provide the guidance at the local level coming from the administrator and his team. We want to be able to make that meaningful and real at the ground level. And we want to focus on all the aspects which include policy, program, economic considerations, and importantly, the sociological piece, because understandably, all of us have to drive at the lowest common denominator. So that may be a business, it may be a local government, it may be an authority, it may be people where they live and work, and we've heard comments. And I'll just share a quick story. So I love recycling. I dutifully wash out my peanut butter jar, which is the worst. That's the worst thing to clean out. At the same time, my wife is throwing it into the garbage, and I'm like, honey, so I'm fishing things out of the garbage, cleaning them and putting them in my recycling bin. But I can tell you, just again, back to Peter's reference to my experience, I also help manage programs as a local official. I help run a solid waste authority in my home county. And to me, the biggest frustration was going through the process of cleaning my peanut butter jar, bringing it to the recycling center, and then understanding that absent having a market for it, it was being commingled and landfilled. And none of us want that. All of us want to see those valuable items restored and put back in the community. So I just want to say that we are united here in purpose, we're united in vision. the leadership from the administrator has energized us as a community. And so one thing I learned today, we talked about be bold, be brief. The last piece was be gone. So I will be gone from you now, but thank you for letting me join you. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Pete. And as you mentioned about the energy at yesterday's Innovation Fair, so I guess we'd like to bring back some of that energy that as apparently as many of you experienced, because so many of you were there yesterday. And I'd like to invite up to make some brief remarks and to welcome two very special guests to the stage. Carter and Oliver Rise, the co-founders of One More Generation. Please join me in welcoming Carter and Olivia.
Hi everyone, my name is Olivia and this is my brother Carter, and we're the founders of an organization called One More Generation, or OMG, that we started back in 2009 because we were passionate about saving endangered species. Our goal with the organization is to save endangered species in our environment for at least one more generation and beyond. Shortly after OMG started, something horrible happened: the BP Gulf oil spill. I remember seeing pictures and videos on CNN of sea turtles and seabirds being pulled out of the water caked in oil. And I knew we had to do something. So my brother and I spent 4 months going door to door to churches, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, basically anybody who would listen, and collected the badly needed supplies. And on my 8th birthday, we drove 11.5 hours down to the Gulf, where we spent the next 5 days working with the Marine Mammal and Sea Turtle Rescue Center. It was amazing. That's where we realized that what we were doing to the environment has a direct impact on all species. The more we looked into the various environmental threats, the more we realized that plastic pollution was one of the largest growing threats to our planet, and in particular, the overuse of single-use plastics. We are here today to support Administrator Wheeler, the EPA, and many other organizations who are working on getting environmental programs standardized in all states. My generation is the one that's having to deal with this problem, yet no one is teaching us about the problem or how to deal with it. Our goal is to partner with the EPA and create a program that will make environmental education mandatory in all schools.
I think a phone was a bad idea. I think I need reading glasses at this point. Getting old here. All right. As Olivia said, we use education as a vehicle to drive change in not only homes, but schools and communities as well. When we returned from the Gulf, we spent the next 5 months educating ourselves on the issue of plastic pollution and trying to find resources available to students like ourselves in schools. And much to our surprise, there weren't any programs that were specifically teaching kids about plastic pollution. So we hired 2 teachers and a retired principal, and we now have authored an award-winning plastic and recycling awareness curriculum, which we are presenting we're presenting now to the EPA and the NAAEE. We actually presented it earlier as well. Our goal is not to demonize plastic, because we all need plastic. What we don't need is to be contributing to the ever-growing problem of plastic pollution with our continued overuse of single-use plastics. Our curriculum is broken into 5 one-hour segments so that schools can share facts with the students every day through the course of the week. It has been written to match the latest national standards for science education and has art, math, and literacy built in. The program has been so popular that it's even being featured in schools around the world. Continuing with our efforts to use environmental education as a driver for change, we launched a global campaign called our One Less Straw Pledge campaign. You all have probably seen the videos of the sea turtles with the straw up its nose, or heard all the different facts about how many straws we're using in the United States and the world. But like we said earlier, the goal is not to demonize straws or even plastic itself. We just want to educate the people about how many we're using and how they can reduce their use of it as well. We want people to know that simple changes in their lives, such as not using a single-use plastic item like a straw, a bag, or a bottle, can have a huge impact on our environment. Our campaign is now global, and over 10,000 people have signed our individual pledges, and over 800 restaurants and businesses around the world have joined up with us. We even have major corporations such as Delta Airlines, Hilton Hotels, and Red Lobster restaurants that have all committed to going straw-free in all their global locations. We aren't only targeting major corporations for the straw usage, however. For example, later this month we have a meeting with Coca-Cola to discuss their six-pack rings around their cans and how we can replace it with cardboard dividers. We will also be discussing the possibility of replacing single-use water bottles on Delta Airlines with aluminum can bottles, which would have a huge impact on the amount of single-use bottles that are ending up in our environment. As you can see, I'm wearing our she is too, all right. We're wearing our campaign buttons that simply say, "We only serve straws upon request, ask me why." This starts a conversation with the consumer and the restaurants as to why they're not mindlessly just handing out the straws. We've seen a 70% reduction in all the restaurants that we've partnered up with within the first week of just wearing the buttons. So our campaign buttons have been translated to 12 different languages, and we're getting Japanese later this month as well. So if you guys know any of the other, I don't know how many languages, please let us know. So I want to thank everyone in attendance here for not only helping our environment, but for allowing future generations to have a cleaner world. Administrator Wheeler's invitation for us to speak here today shows that his administration is open to finding solutions that will have global impact. So I ask all of you here today to help us make an environmental education mandatory in all schools and to help us bring our award-winning curriculum to every student in the country and beyond. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Carter and Olivia. So next, I'd like to welcome to the podium and introduce our next speaker, Ms. Helen Loman, the President and CEO of Keep America Beautiful. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Loman.
Thank you, Administrator Wright, and thank you, Carter and Olivia, for everything that you do. I recommend upgrading to the iPad side, especially when you get to be my age. I would say we're definitely in good hands with this future generation doing the work they do, don't you think? Let's give them another round of applause. I'd also like to extend a very, very special thanks to the EPA, Administrator Wheeler, and to all of his staff for convening today's America Recycles Summit. And just for bringing together so many different organizations from so many different sectors. You know, we're all here from government, from industry, and nonprofit leaders, and so many more to celebrate America Recycles Day. This year's theme of America Recycles Day, I think you guys have already heard it, but it bears repeating, are twofold: innovation and partnership. And in partnership with the EPA, we've conducted a series of initiatives this week highlighting how all Americans, from the business community to our armed services, are banding together to recycle more and to recycle correctly. These initiatives and the progress the America Recycles work group members will be sharing today underscore the important role America Recycles Day plays in educating our citizens about the importance of recycling to our economy and environmental well-being. On Monday, as you've already heard, I had the great pleasure of participating in a Veterans Day event at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. And I was there with Ken McQueen, the EPA Region 6 Administrator. And the event honored and recognized Fort Bliss recycling heroes for their commitment to recycling while celebrating Fort Bliss's successes as a pilot net zero waste installation. And yesterday, so many of you guys were at the Innovation Fair, and it provided a great opportunity to showcase to the public advances in recycling technology, product development, and materials usage. I also hope that you enjoyed the reception after the fair, and that was really a wonderful way for all of us to get together and to really talk about what it is we're doing, to talk about future partnerships with each other, and build on what we've already done. Most importantly, as you all know, the heartbeat of America Recycles Day is the work of thousands of local organizations across this nation. Government institutions, schools, businesses, faith-based organizations, and other community partners, including my very own Keep America Beautiful network of 600 community-based affiliates, are conducting educational workshops and recycling collection events in service to our collective mission to advance recycling. So I don't think I need to convince any of you that nothing good in this world happens without partnership. Since our founding in 1953, Keep America Beautiful has partnered with other nonprofits, corporations, and government, creating social impact through effective tri-sector partnerships. In fact, many of you in this room have partnered with Keep America Beautiful over the years through your support of America Recycles Day and our public space recycling partnerships. So for example, we've been successfully working with the Coca-Cola Foundation on a public space recycling grant program for many years. And this year, we actually launched a new public space recycling partnership with Keurig Dr. Pepper to provide recycling infrastructure at playgrounds that they built in underinvested communities across the nation. Absolutely none of this would be possible without the strong, long-term relationships we've had for decades with government, corporate, and nonprofit partners. Today's summit is among the best examples of a tri-sector partnership. We have before us an opportunity for leaders in the recycled materials economy value chain to share their perspectives on how we can all work together in partnership with each other along with the federal government to continue to support efforts to strengthen the U.S. recycling system and craft a new national recycling strategy. So while there are many of those folks out there who say the United States is in a recycling crisis, I actually believe we're in a recycling transformation. And based on today's gathering, there's little doubt in my mind that as we go through this transformation, we'll arrive at a recycling system that works for all Americans. Yes, we need to develop and strengthen markets and infrastructure to meet the changing waste stream and identify a consistent way to measure that progress. But for Americans, a national challenge presents opportunity. When necessity calls, Americans always find a way, and recycling is a modern necessity. We must do better in our pursuit of creating a circular economy. And we need to do that through a combination of innovation and partnership. All of us have a role to play. Together, we can lead the planet in responsible consumerism and manage waste for not just one more generation, right?
Thank you.
But for many generations to come. Much of this work has actually been underway since the last America Recycles Day through the steering committees. Today's report outs will provide us with a preview, an innovation roadmap designed to help us capture more of the value of the material in the products we consume, build the collection and processing infrastructure, and continue to grow the marketplace for products made with recycled content, closing the loop. So before we proceed, I'd like to take a moment to thank the steering committee leaders for the 4 work groups. First, education and outreach. I'd like to thank the Recycling Partnership and the Sustainable Packaging Coalition, along with Keep America Beautiful. Infrastructure, ISRI and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, along with Keep America Beautiful. Markets, the Recycling Partnership, South Carolina Department of Commerce, and Waste Management. And measurement, Environmental Research and Education Foundation. This is just an example of how we all work together all year round, to address this important issue. I'm so excited to hear about the progress you've all made together this past year, and I just want to take a moment for all of us to thank everyone on these work groups for the work that they've done. Certainly, what each of our organizations does individually is vitally important. But it's what we all do together that can actually change the world. Innovation and partnership will be critical as we seek solutions that can improve our recycling infrastructure and processes, as well as the development of new products comprised of post-recycled content that consumers want to purchase. Based on what we've all been seeing during America Recycles Week and today on America Recycles Day, I'd say that it's clear that Americans and American organizations are stepping up to the task and addressing this challenge head on with American ingenuity. We look forward to working with you to build a culture of recycling and a more resilient recycling system. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Helen, and really thank you to all of our speakers. So I think another round of applause. Well, I'd like to just take a couple of moments here to go over very briefly a little bit about the great work that has taken place and been completed over the last year. As Administrator Wheeler referenced, much has been accomplished and is presented in the National Framework for Advancing the U.S. Recycling System, which, as we've said, U.S. EPA is releasing today. And so I'll provide a very quick overview of the efforts to date, and then turn the podium over to the America Recycling Steering Committee members, who will give presentations on the key workgroup products, as well as a preview of the workgroup's plans over the next year to come. So last year, as on America Recycles Day, we had 45 organizations who signed the pledge. I can say this, every day, the pledge, which I thought I needed to preserve as an official government document, sits in my office. And so if I look in one direction away from the computer screen, I look at the Washington Monument and the African American Museum, very inspiring view. And if I look in the other direction, there is the pledge. And so I'm inspired by it every day. Following this summit, participants from the pledge signing organizations volunteer to participate in 4 work groups, each focusing on one of the America Recycles action areas in order to develop collaborative solutions to the challenges facing the U.S. recycling system. Once more, these 4 action areas are promoting education and outreach, enhancing materials management and infrastructure, strengthening secondary markets, and enhancing measurements. The work groups began meeting very early in 2019 and established vision statements to focus their efforts on what success would look like for each of the action areas. The following successes statements were produced by the work group participants. For measurement, establishing standardized recycling metrics that are supported by consistent terminology and methodology. For the education and outreach group, their statement was develop clear and consistent messages about proper materials management activities to enable consumers to recognize the value of reusing, recovering, and recycling materials, as well as the value of buying products with recycled content. For the markets group, their vision was to produce high-quality recycled materials that can be incorporated easily into products, driving demand and creating integrated, robust, and sustainable domestic recycling market. And for infrastructure, it's building a holistic, modern, and adaptable national recycling infrastructure that embraces innovation and is resilient to changes in material streams, markets, and consumer expectations. Workgroup participants identified priority actions and set to work on developing new products. Today, we're going to hear about a few of those new products that are being released. For more information about all the work completed to date by EPA and the America Recycles Workgroup participants, I encourage you to refer to the framework, which is being posted, which is now even posted online, and copies are available where you registered. So let's get to the, hear about the details of the great work that's been accomplished over this past year.
And just for the folks who are up at the table, you guys are free to go if you'd like to sit down. Oh. You don't need to stay up there if you don't want to, but otherwise, we'll go ahead with our presenters for the different work groups. Okay.
To bring up, with regard to measurement, to welcome Deborah Kantner with the Environmental Research and Education Foundation to discuss the development of a draft definition of recycling and a map schematic of the recycling system.
Thank you. And first off, I'd just like to thank Administrator Wheeler and all of the EPA staff for facilitating space over the last year for a diverse group of industry representatives to come together and discuss the challenges with measuring recycling. So as mentioned, I'm Deborah Kantner. I'm the Sustainability Director with the Environmental Research and Education Foundation, and I'm pleased to share these draft products that have come out of the measurement work group this year. There we go. All right, so over 2019, the group focused on two key topics. First, challenges that come from the differing concepts of recycling and different definitions that are used by various local and state agencies, governments within the federal government, as well as nonprofits and things of that nature. We also recognize that the recycling system is comprised of a very diverse group of stakeholders and many steps to take something from a waste product to a feedstock for manufacturing. And with this, there are many challenges, so we set out to map this system to provide some clarity. Now, the first challenge that the group chose to address was that of the divergent definitions of recycling, and we collectively agreed it would be very beneficial to develop a recycling definition in order to clarify first what we're mapping, what we're measuring, and to move forward with that. So as part of this work, we identified about 60 recycling definitions, as I mentioned, from federal and local governments as well as nonprofits, and then we spent a long time within the group discussing some of the similarities, the way these definitions differ, to really get to the heart conceptually of what we mean when we're talking about recycling. And with many months of work and input, we developed this draft definition, which is up on the screen. And it is that recycling refers to the series of activities by which discarded or used materials are collected, sorted, processed, and or converted into feedstock and are used in the manufacture of new products. Recycling excludes the use of these materials for energy production or as fuel substitutes, as well as for composting. So we recognize that this draft definition is not inclusive of all technologies that have some sustainability benefit, and that is something that we will be looking to develop additional definitions for in the coming year. But with this draft definition, it did allow us to then move into the system mapping phase. And so we've developed a map that looks from drawing from national, state, and local systems to outline the activities from generation through remanufacturing that are required to have a successful recycling system. And we've also begun mapping the flows of material within this system to aid in future measurement efforts. And that includes things like looking at the import and export of material, as well as the way that we manage residuals and contamination that enter the system. Now, from this point forward, we've now been able to work over the last 2 to 3 months on fleshing out this system. So Our clicker does not appear to be working. There we go. So we've looked over the last 2 months at now the further flows and the various types of entities that fit into each of these categories. So who are all of the different stakeholders in collection or processing? What are the flows between these entities? It's a bit of a web more than a straight line. So really working to understand all of the possible flows and where we might be able to measure recycling and develop metrics that truly strengthen our understanding of the system performance. And as mentioned, that's something that will be a key focus in 2020, is now overlaying the various metrics for success onto this map and understanding where we can measure to understand how to address the challenges of the current recycling system. So thank you again, EPA, for facilitating this discussion so that we could develop these products.
Well, thank you, Deborah. So I'd like to next welcome a panel to come up and sit up here, and that on this next panel is Randy Hartman with Keep America Beautiful, Dylan DeThomas with the Recycling Partnership, Trina Matta with the Sustainable Packing Coalition, and they'll address the development of clear and consistent messaging to support education and outreach.
Brandon, should we be at the podium or should we be at the table?
We can just...
Thank you. Very good. Hi, everybody. We'll make this work. My name is Dylan DeThomas. I'm with the Recycling Partnership. We have Randy Hartman with Keep America Beautiful and my colleague Trina Matta from Sustainable Packaging Coalition in Green Blue. I want to start by thanking, everybody's been thanking the administrator and the assistant administrator. Thank you both. But I also really want to shout out to the hard work of the EPA staff. Kathleen, Cheryl, Ron, Barnes, and their whole team have just done an incredible, epic amount of work over the last year. You know, sometimes it's like wrangling cats or herding cats, and sometimes it's like herding bobcats or badgers. So it can be really... And as Deborah just said before, you know, recycling's super complicated. You know, we sometimes as consumers think it should be really simple and easy, and we can all do it really, you know, all you have to do is just one thing, and then it's all going to be fixed. And what we know, and a lot of the people here in this room know, that recycling's not one thing. It's a series of loosely connected and highly dependent pieces, and you know, there's a lot of really diverse stakeholders as part of the recycling system. And we do have a clicker right here. Thank you so much. And so you can't even read all those logos over there. So if you can't read all those logos over there, you can see the challenge that we might have to have all of them agree on a single particular communication strategy, because you have to communicate a lot of different things to a lot of different diverse stakeholders. And we made some progress. Yeah, we really got moving, and we found what we wanted to make sure we were able to do is get all of the input from those folks to be able to have a easy to find and verified specific data about specific material streams. So there would be one place for people to go, especially our journalist friends there in the back, to be able to get statistics about what materials are being recovered, where they're going into market, and how much of it is being recovered, as well as honestly some messaging from all of those various stakeholders on how they are able to, how they want to play a part in the circular economy. And we did a survey of a lot of the folks. Trina, you want to take over?
Sure. So one thing the work group really wanted to focus on is there's been a lot of information in the news about some of the negatives about recycling, and we all know there's a lot of positives to recycling too, and so we really wanted to emphasize those and how vibrant the recycling economy really is in the United States. And so we focused on that, and we focused on getting that message out to the public, and so we are working on a series of graphics. Brandon, can you control the next slide? There we go.
You got it.
And so we're working on some draft graphics, and we have one that's pretty close to completion. We're still trying to gather feedback from our Education and Outreach Committee and incorporate that so that we can eventually share that with the entire America Recycles Network work group, get their feedback, and then finalize this. But as you can see, we're trying to really emphasize the economic benefits of recycling, as well as some of the environmental benefits. And this particular graphic shares some great data from ISRI and other members of our committee on the jobs that are created by recycling in the U.S., both overall, as you can see at the top, and as you probably can't read lower down, by different material types that are recyclable. In addition to that, jobs by region or state, and then some quotes from our work group members about how recycling is so important to their organizations or to their regions of the country. So like I said, we're still gathering feedback on this, but we hope to finalize it soon. Either of you want to add anything?
So just when we think about this, we need to, you heard from the measurement group, and that gets really technical, and that is the information that we want in this room. We want that consistency, but as we look to educate with the public and the general public, we need to remember that for the most Americans, recycling stops when they put it in the bin. They don't understand the rest of the process. So in part, what our working committee has really been emphasizing on is sharing the rest of the story. So that's why the jobs graphic, to let people know that when they put that container in the bin, that piece of paper in the bin, it's supporting jobs, not, nationally and also in their community. So that's the one infographic that we started with. We're also working on one that kind of looks at the entire recycling process more at the public and consumer education level. So it won't be as detailed as the measurement group is looking at it, but it will talk about some of the process and comparing recycling to virgin extraction and the closed loop of recycling and how that really builds on a community and the infrastructure in the community and how they play an important role in that. So again, expect a lot of more information to come. We want to have all this, the graphics and information housed on the clearinghouse, and you're going to hear from Stephanie about that. So again, that collectively we can all use the same materials, the same message, and speak with one voice when it comes to recycling and have that message on America Recycles Day.
That was it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Randy, Dylan, and Trina. Actually, Dylan, you didn't need to leave. So it's like an award show here. So please join me in welcoming Dylan DeThomas with the Recycling Partnership. It's a little like the Grammys here. Chantel Fryer with the South Carolina Department of Commerce, and Susan Robinson with Waste Management, who will talk to you about the market development workshops held over the past year, as well as the marketing development toolkit.
All right, good morning. My name is Chantal Fryer. I'm Director of Recycling Market Development for the South Carolina Department of Commerce. And we are a little unique in that we are an economic development agency with a recycling unit of 2.5 staff who focus, eat, sleep, and breathe recycling and the jobs that it creates all across our state. We have done some research and we realized that people are more likely to recycle, 80% more likely to recycle if they know what happens to their materials beyond the recycling bin. And so we have a program in our state called Your Bottle Means Jobs, taking that path. In addition, I serve on the National Recycling Coalition board as co-chair of the Markets Committee, whose goal it is to reignite market development across the nation. And I might be going backwards, I apologize. So our partners in this effort are Circular Matters, Renew, Resource Recycling Systems, and the EPA. And in 2019, our work group focused on continuing the work that we did in recycling market development. In 2018, we had held 4 workshops across the nation from Portland, Oregon, all the way over to Atlanta, Georgia. In 2019, we did workshops in Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the Resource Recycling Conference, and San Antonio, Texas, in conjunction with STAR and the EPA, as well as Chula Vista, California, is being scheduled for 2020. And what we learned is that, like people, companies need their Match.com as it relates to recycling. At Resource Recycling Conference, we learned about a company called Ingenico that takes 3 through 7 plastics and turns it into railroad ties. This was news to a lot of people, and there were some really good conversations about what new markets need to be developed as a result of things like MRF film and other materials that are in our area. Another thing we learned was that by reigniting the conversation around recycling market development is that there are actions being taken at the state level to reform recycling market development programs. So in states like Washington, Colorado, Maryland, Oregon, Michigan, we're all seeing activities in this area, which means that this is a really needed part of the recycling value chain. Some of the work group results that we saw when we were doing these interactive sessions is we did an interactive polling, and you can see here education is one of the biggest components of it, but also contamination and markets. In 2020, we'll do several more workshops and webinars for recycling market development, looking at markets all the way from California to Maryland. And then, in addition to this, the Recycling Markets Work Group is looking at how we can regenerate information about Buy Recycled and looking at a platform by which consumers, governments, anyone who is interested in buying recycled can learn where those materials can be purchased from. And so I leave you with this note. If we have nothing, we have hope. Our industry is very hopeful and optimistic that we are going to make the changes needed for the future.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Hi, it's me again, guys. Oh, wrong way. Let's try that. Okay, so we're also, I'm filling in for my colleague at the Recycling Partnership and the Association of Plastic Recyclers, Liz Bedard. Those of you who know Liz Bedard know that I'm no Liz Bedard. So as part of end markets, obviously collection is a part of this story as well, and so right now in the churn that is in the recycling market, something that is sometimes underspoken about is the contracts between the MRFs and the communities that are served by those MRFs that sort those materials out, and the how to keep both of those parties whole financially and make the system continue to be viable. And so we had heard a cry from the communities that we as the Recycling Partnership serve to be able to produce a best management practices document that is building on the great success of the National Waste and Recycling Association, SWANA, and ISRI, consulting with them using documents that they had produced to be able to provide a document to those communities to be able to better negotiate those contracts with the MRFs and their haulers to make sure that the recycling system is created. And this was going to be run through this subcommittee and then presented out to the communities and the haulers of the United States.
All right, and finally, the Markets Working Group is interested in launching, I don't know if I can do it or you can do it, oh, great. Yep. Is interested in launching a Recycling Demand Challenge program in 2020. So I am also singing the song of Liz Bedard, who could not be here today, who has really invested on behalf of the Association for Plastic Recyclers just a huge amount of work in developing the Demand Champions program. So we've really talked about modeling a program after APR's Demand Champions program. where they've enlisted private industry to purchase products made with new volumes of post-consumer materials. The idea is to increase the use of recyclables in those basic goods that we manufacture, that we use, and that we recycle across America. For example, as part of that program, with Liz's encouragement, Waste Management's purchasing department worked with our cart supplier to provide residential recycling and trash carts made with the plastic that we collect in our curbside recycling programs. So these types of efforts will increase the demand for recyclables, pulling more supply through the system. The program supports a couple of important steps along the recycling supply chain. First, using post-consumer content in basic goods will offset large volumes of virgin materials, which is why we recycle in the first place and how we will create robust recycling programs for the future. So it follows then that this will create more domestic demand for products made with recycled content, boosting that circular economy while reducing our reliance on the export market. Next slide. I'm just going to ask you to do it, Brandon. Thank you. Yes. So this slide really highlights the success of APR's program. Over 25 million pounds of new post-consumer resin was added to the recycling supply chain in 2019, and more companies are signed up for 2020. So the Markets Working Group is hoping to work with APR in 2020 to expand this program to include all material types beyond plastic into a comprehensive, industry-wide, nationwide demand challenge program. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those very interesting remarks, Dylan, Chantal, and Susan. And I'd like to now and ask you to join me in welcoming Adina Adler with the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries and Stephanie Potter with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, who will talk about the development of a virtual clearinghouse.
All right. Morning. My name is Stephanie Potter. I oversee the Sustainability and Circular Economy portfolio within the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Corporate Citizenship Center. Did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Adina Renee Adler. I'm Assistant Vice President for International Affairs at the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries.
So, on behalf of the working group that we're representing, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Just by way of a refresher, the foundation is the 501c3 affiliate of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Well positioned within the recycling value chain with a track record of educating and partnering with government agencies, state and local chambers of commerce, and business and industry stakeholders to promote impact and reform efforts across the country. And we're contributing to EPA's work streams because they align with our mission around helping the private sector be a force for good. And we are already working with a lot of the folks in this room on a collective impact place-based Beyond 34 initiative, perhaps Beyond 35, according to today's update from Administrator Wheeler, launched in 2017 and dedicated to helping our country move as a whole beyond the current recycling rate. So just by way of a refresher, because many of you are familiar with this initiative, the goals of Beyond 34 more specifically are to spotlight place-based work and catalyze place-based action, but then also to create a national overlay of replicable tools and insights that can be used by folks across the country to improve their recycling rates at that level. So we're currently active in 2 regions with this initiative, Orlando and Cincinnati, and we are developing this national overlay in close collaboration with Keep America Beautiful and Institute for Scrap Recycling Industries. And I'll ask Adina and also Randy and others from KIB to jump in if there's anything missing in terms of this overview of the portal that we're building as part of this working group. So the idea of this online portal, which we'll show you some examples of in a moment, is that we can't really move the country as a whole beyond the current recycling rate with sort of direct involvement. So what we're looking to do is have this shelf of tools and resources, support referral traffic that comes our way through our work, and also enables communities to apply this model and other models that are out there around recycling and recovery best practices themselves, according to their own local capacities and contexts. This portal will be inclusive of infrastructure-focused opportunities, but not specific to and not exclusively that. And so it's really intended to be more of a one-stop shop for waste management leaders, businesses, local chambers, and communities for accessing resources and tools from leading organizations throughout the recycling value chain and across the space. It'll have several components, and maybe we'll walk through them now. I can try the clicker, or Brandon, if you want to just flip to the first one. Will be an example of best practices at the local level, so what's already working. We can use insights out of our work in the regions that we're working with Beyond 34, but looking to collect those examples from others as well, so that we can see some of that at the local level in a national way. The next piece will be templates and customizable blueprints that on the Beyond 34 approach, on other approaches that have sort of customizable uses for local stakeholders to engage their community in recycling optimization efforts. So another template base that will likely be on this will be Keep America's Beautiful Public Space Recycling Guide. Looking for any others that people have around being able to sort of customize some approaches that have worked in a local context. And then finally will be, and perhaps this is the most robust part of it, will be a resources portal kind of tagged by intervention type, so financing, partnerships, communication, infrastructure, things like this, as well as by material type. So you can sort of sort and sift and find what's out there around some of the work that we're all doing in our own lanes, but really being able to sort of segment that and be able to have that be accessible to anyone that wants to access it. A little bit more here is that also when the resources are published, they'll include information on state and federal government funding opportunities, including grants and loans for innovation and infrastructure development, as well as best practices for how businesses, governments, and nonprofits can use and reuse materials more productively across their entire life cycles. Do you want to say any more on infrastructure?
Just a minute. I think, well, the first thing I want to say on behalf of not just the steering committee of this working group, but I think the entire working group, when I can say we are very grateful to the Chamber Foundation and the Beyond 34 initiative for taking a piece of work that they were already developing or already had out there and allowing us to fill it with a lot more information about recycling. So thank you to you and all your colleagues for allowing us to kind of weasel our way in to your platform. Over the course of the last few weeks, we have been inundating Stephanie and her team with a lot of resources and information to support, especially the resource side of this portal, to be able to tell that full story of what is happening in recycling today and what is the potential in the future. And many of you associations in this room represent specific commodities. I see you out there, you know. We've submitted some of your information as well because it's very, very important for Americans to understand what is not recyclable and what is the realm of possibility. And I think if you have a chance to go through the website and you think that there's a gap of information, certainly please let us know. And the only last comment I wanted to make, because I don't actually think it's been made yet, but you may have already sort of observed that even though we were organized by 4 work groups, there was a lot of overlap in the work that we did, and this is a great example of that. So Dylan talked earlier about, you know, compiling this information and getting information into the hands of Americans so that they can help us do a better job with recycling, and this is that platform. This is the infrastructure of getting that information out. It's just as critical as the physical infrastructure for doing the recycling is. So we thank you all who have sent us information, and we'll certainly welcome more of it.
And just a quick last plug on that note in terms of 2020 activities and priorities. Maybe Brandon, if you just flip to my contact information, although I hesitate to offer it. So if you do have resources, please send them, continue to send them our way. We really are in a collection mode, and we're trying to do this in the next 6 weeks or so that we can kind of have this be robust and pretty comprehensive across intervention type and get it launched and live and accessible. We are also targeting being able to bring this to our gathering of local chambers that happens once or twice a year to the next gathering of that, so that we can really announce and sort of share this with folks that will then go back to their respective regions and be able to sort of offer this to the business and other parts of the communities that they work with. So that's a quick plug there. And then I think, additionally, this portal is intended to be sort of iterative. So, it will continue to be something that we hope to design to meet community needs and fill gaps in the space with respect to what's out there on recycling and recovery access and awareness. So all ideas are welcome. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Dina and Stephanie. Fascinating work and all examples, I think, of the power of connection and collaboration. Well, as you can see, the America Recycles work groups have been very busy over the past year, and we recognize that there's still many opportunities to continue this collaborative work and to create a robust and resilient recycling system. EPA is committed to continuing to support the efforts moving forward, convening stakeholders, and facilitating the national dialogue. We're undertaking efforts in all the 4 action areas. So let me talk a little bit, very briefly, about some of that work. This week, EPA released our latest Advancing Sustainable Material Management Facts and Figures report, which provides updated information on material generation and management in the United States. We also have plans to revise the 1997 document, Measuring Recycling, a guide for state and local governments, as well as our Recon tool, which calculates environmental benefits associated with recycled content. We intend to build on the measurement work group's draft definition of recycling to work with other federal agencies and seek public input to establishing national recycling definitions. To promote education and outreach, we published our pledge, signatory success stories, and voices of veteran stories to highlight the accomplishments and the important contributions that veterans make to the recycling industry. We have also published our WasteWise Partner Success Stories in honor of WasteWise 25th anniversary, again to demonstrate that it takes collaborative effort and action across the recycling system to really make a difference. Next year, EPA plans to develop a pilot education campaign to encourage recycling through retail and alternative collection programs, thus decreasing the amount of plastic film entering curbside collection programs, which you've all heard already quite a bit about today. To support market development, EPA intends to provide support in hosting market development workshops across the country. We're going to develop options for incentive-based voluntary program focused on increasing recycling as well as demand for post-consumer recycling materials. Regarding infrastructure, we intend to develop a national map of existing recycling infrastructure to provide a clearer picture of the current domestic recycling infrastructure and support efforts to identify those gaps that need investment. We plan to conduct webinars and outreach on the clearinghouse to increase resources and information included in that web-based tool that you just heard about. And as you heard from the administrator, underpinning all of these efforts will be the critical task of seeking input from all of you to establish national goals to increase recycling. And we're going to do that all throughout 2020 until next year's summit, when we're going to be able to announce those recycling goals. Even with all these great activities underway, there's so much more that needs to be done. And so we'd like to move to the part of our summit to have a panel discussion about this agenda. So what we've done is we've assembled a panel of leaders representing the entire recycling system to tell us more about what needs there still are to enhance the recycling system in the United States and what opportunities remain to leverage the collective efforts of everyone in order to achieve this goal. Our panel discussion today will be moderated by Pat Tellerico, who's a contractor to EPA. And thank you, Pat, for leading us through this conversation. So please welcome and please join me in welcoming the panelists for this part of our summit. Robin Weiner, President of the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries; David Biederman, CEO of the Solid Waste Association of North America; Keith Harrison, CEO of the Recycling Partnership; Judy Shea, Associate Executive Director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors; Bruce Karras, Vice President of Environment, Sustainability, Safety, and Technical Information at the Coca-Cola Company. Megan Stas, Vice President, Packaging Sustainability, the Grocers Manufacturing Association, and Bridget Croak, Vice President, External Affairs, Closed Loop Partners. Together, these organizations represent voices from across the recycling system, from design, marketing, consumer use, post-consumer collection, processing for markets, and return for manufacturing. Thank you for joining us, and we're going to turn it over to Pat to facilitate what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion.
Thank you, Peter. So if I stand down here, am I okay? All right. So I'm going to stand down here so I can see you guys. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I did want to make a quick announcement before we go to the panel members. We are going to make the information on the slides available to everybody afterwards, so don't worry if you didn't capture it on your phone or write it all down. So we will have that information. So welcome to our panelists. Basically, the way that this is going to work, as I mentioned before, you guys have the ability to ask the panel some questions, and we're going to do that through a poll everywhere system. And so, Brandon, do you have that instructions up? So you can do this in two ways. You can do the web method by going through your phone and going on the web and typing in that information. And again, I think you've got little cards with this information as well. And then you can also text. So you can text a message to that number and we can get your message. So that's the high-tech portion of that process. Then it's going to go over here, and people are going to work with that, and they're going to write a question on a card and give it to me, all right? So that's the low-tech version. All right, so please feel free, as we go through this, to write down a question, make sure that we get to it. We should be really good on time, so hopefully we'll have plenty of time to hear from you all, as well as to hear from the rest of the audience as well. With that, we've got a few questions here to kick off our conversation. And so wanted to give folks the opportunity to talk a little bit about the actions that they're planning to take in support of this national framework effort. Again, as we've said, it's been going on for about a year. People have been very active in that process, and I'm sure that people have lots of things that they're working on that they want to share that are going to advance that framework into the future. And so I'm going to go and just start a little randomly in the middle with David Biederman. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that you're doing in your organization to advance this framework?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. First of all, it's a privilege to be sitting here at America Recycles Day, and thank you to all of you for all the great work that you're doing to help preserve recycling in the United States. And let me add my thanks to many of the others who have been on this stage, to EPA Administrator Wheeler and the terrific EPA staff for bringing us here today. For those of you who don't know, SWANA, the Solid Waste Association of North America, is the largest waste and recycling association in the United States. So we have a chapter network all across this great country with chapters from coast to coast. And what we intend to do is we intend to embed the framework now that it's out into our chapters. We want to make sure that our chapters, our members in various parts of the United States are aware of what the framework says and get them to participate in the implementation and the actions that are listed in there. On the Metro this morning, I took a look at the framework and noticed that more than 30 organizations that are affiliated with SWANA have signed the pledge, which is extraordinary. It's nearly a fifth of all the signers. So I'm confident that our membership is going to be embracing the framework. The second item that I would mention is that I believe I expressed to EPA that SWAN is interested in hosting a market development workshop. I saw one of our national conference locations up on the map. That may or may not be one of the locations. I have no idea, but we would certainly be interested in doing that. And thirdly, as was mentioned during the presentations from the work groups, we're going to be working together with our association brothers and sisters on the best management practices contracting toolkit, which is a very critical component of the relationship between local governments and the companies that process the material and turn it into sellable commodities. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So why don't we go ahead and go down to the end of the table there for closed loop and hear from you guys. We haven't heard much about you today, so tell us a little more.
Hi, everybody. I'm with Closed Loop Partners. We're an investment and innovation firm investing in advancing a circular economy. I was here a year ago, and it's great to see all the progress and coordination that's happening. And I think the framework really sets out basically what we do for a living, and our goal is to leverage that to advance that even further. So our particular kind of areas of deep focus will continue to be investment of infrastructure, of which we've invested over $70 million across our investment funds. This year we will have, by the end of the year, probably $300 million in management across a combination of infrastructure, innovation, and market development. So really where we will be focusing kind of how we advance this work forward is continuing to both bring our capital, the capital of our investors, which are both many of the corporate entities in the room today, and also more institutional capital to the table. And I think that the work that's being done here will hopefully continue to create a market signal and a signal that reduces risk for capital providers to bring more capital to the table. And at the same time, through kind of the evolution of our process and how we make investments, we're really trying to connect the dots to make sure that we're investing in such a way that the market is able to actually take advantage of the materials that exist, both investing directly in market development, but also looking at the way that contracts are written and helping our corporate partners and our investments understand how to kind of make those links across the supply chain to actually ensure that the economics work for more circular supply chains.
Thank you. Such an important component of this is that financing piece and the funding. We heard a lot about that already this morning. Why don't we go to your next door neighbor there?
Sure. Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Megan Stas. I'm with the Grocery Manufacturers Association. In the interest of reducing confusion and education, we do not represent grocery stores. GMA represents the leading CPG companies in the U.S. So this is an incredibly important issue and topic for our members, because packaging is incredibly important to our members, right? We need it, we use it for the billions of consumers that use our products every day. But too much of it is either ending up in places that it shouldn't, right, in the environment, or it's being landfilled, right? We agree that recycling rates are far too low. When we think about the elements of this work, we're really incredibly excited about it. I agree with Bridget that the amount of progress that's happened over the past year has really been exceptional. And for us, we really are, I'm thinking about this from sort of two different lenses. One is the end market development piece and sending those demand signals for more quality and cost-effective recycled content in the marketplace. We know that all of the 25 largest CPG companies in the world have made aggressive public commitments to either making their packaging recyclable or compostable, or using a lot more recycled content in their packaging by 2030. Some as soon as 2025, which is really right around the corner. But there isn't enough. And there isn't enough recycled content right now. So how do we build out those end markets? So that's something that we're particularly interested in. And then the second piece is really around education and consumer education. And we know that consumers absolutely want to recycle. It is the number one environmental action that consumers indicate that they're interested in and willing to take. But consumers are incredibly confused about what to do. And that's because we have, depending on who you ask, I know the Recycling Partnership cites 20,000 different recycling systems in the US, and EPA uses a number around 10,000. GMA did some research earlier this year that found that Americans think that doing their taxes is easier than recycling. And assembling IKEA furniture. So we've got a long way to go in terms of getting the packaging that all of our companies are making recyclable and getting them actually recycled. And so that consumer education, standards, streamlining, that's going to be a really important area for our industry to play.
Great. So let me actually just jump down here to Bruce, because I know that you guys have been doing work kind of in that nexus of consumer packaging, products, and education.
Sure. Thanks, and it's great to be here to kind of a lot of familiar faces for us as a brand. But imagine as we set our goals, like many other companies, where our goal is to recover 100% of the bottles and cans we sell by 2030. That's globally. And to get at least 50% recycled content in our primary packaging and make sure that we design 100% recyclable packages. Sounds good, but I'm the guy that's sitting there that has to go, how do we do it? And that's a big lift. So being at a forum like this where I have partners that we're working with, like Keep America Beautiful and Recycling Partnership, Closed Loop Fund, these are all organizations that have helped us. So I like to look at these areas in a real simple way. So I usually, in my role, I have to handle water, sustainable agriculture, all these areas. Typically, there is no playbook. What's heartening is sitting here and actually seeing the emergence of a playbook, definitions, talking about best practices. We're going to need that collectively, and it's going to need to be robust to move forward. So that's exciting to see that developing, and we're going to need to continue to work on that. In the plastic space, so I have three things I keep in mind with sustainability: innovation, partnerships, and passion. Okay, innovation is not just a different package, because I have to remind our designers, if you make a new package, you make a new waste stream, right? It's also innovation how we do things, and what's very fascinating with the waste stream that we have today, going from the consumer's hand back into a bottle or back into a fabric, is we're going to have to really innovate that process. I don't think it's all set in stone yet, but we have a lot of work to do, but people are looking at it in many different spaces. So that's innovation, so it's in things and in how we do things. Partnerships, and partnerships are critical for us as a company. I might be partnering with another beverage company, thinking about how we do something collectively, or with groups like I've mentioned already, or with the federal government. All those things should be fair game and on the table for us to figure out how to move things forward. And then the last piece I throw out is passion. So think about it in a company, in a brand, to get our marketers to start to think about how they talk to consumers about what we want them to do with our package. It's a big step. So you have to be passionate internally to really drive that through the organization. But what's great about this forum here is you see a merging of all those pieces together, the partnerships, innovations, and how we do things. And really, there's a lot of passion in this room.
Great. All right, I'm going to go back there to Keith. You want to share a little bit more about what you're doing?
Awesome. Hi, I'm Keith Harrison, CEO of the Recycling Partnership. And if you've ever been on a panel, it's way more fun if people ask questions. So I hope you're using the app. And I really liked earlier how Dylan worked in bobcats and badgers. So if any of you can work that into your question, we will all give you a round of applause. I think that's fair.
She's not lying.
Yeah. One thing that Megan just brought up is, how many communities are there? The census tells us there's 20,000, but every single one of them think about recycling. Some of them manage it in different ways through jurisdictions, counties, council of governments, things like that. But the lack of coordination between all of them is the consumer frustration part. Our organization was formed 5 years ago to be an action agent. We need work helping every community across the country in building a consistent platform, and we do that in a number of ways. We've plugged millions of dollars into grants into communities to help every citizen recycle. We launched all sorts of interactive free tools for every company and community in this country to have access to drag and drop labeling and stickers and promotional materials. And today I just saw the cover of a new tool we have. It's the Gridiron Green comic book series that's targeted at really making sure that environmental issues are accessible for every child, and partnering with NFL star Ovi is really great, and to do that. And I just saw, as I was walking up, a picture of the cover, and it's really cool. So we really try to balance understanding that every citizen in this country is our demographic, but it's not a citizen responsibility. They are part of it. They do not own it. And that's why we are primarily corporate funded and proud to be so. We believe that we need an action agent that's backed by the companies like Coca-Cola who are making serious commitments to recycle. Coca-Cola is an expert in creating delicious beverages and making sure that people buy them. They are not recycling experts, so they need a partner to get that over the line. And that's where nonprofits like ours, like KB, like efforts like Closed Loop Fund, everyone, that's why they come together. And I'll just close with partnership is part of our name for a reason, because it takes everyone doing this together, and that sounds so kumbaya, right? That sounds real, collaboration sounds cute. Collaboration is the hardest part of this job, and so I encourage all of us as we're working on 2020 goals to think about how do we need to let go of old hang-ons to the old system and instead invest ourselves in really launching Recycling 2.0.
Great, thank you. Let me go to Robin, and then we'll close it out with Judy, because I think this is locally is where all of this comes together.
Thank you. My name is Robin Wiener, and I'm with ISRI, and we're the association that represents the private recycling industry. And I think one of the things that makes us unique is that we're across all the commodities, so plastics, paper, metals, glass, textiles, electronics. And we are, first of all, really excited to be here, because I see the growth from where we started a year ago. And one of the things that makes EPA unique is their ability to bring us all together through one platform, because although many of us, and I know all of us here at the front table, have been actively working with partnerships over the last, I would say, decades, we've never really seen the full spectrum as we have here, all the stakeholders together. And the truth is, in order to achieve what we're all trying to achieve in strengthening the residential recycling infrastructure, we do need these partnerships. And so we're really excited to be here. And there are a number of things that we're doing to build on what EPA has started this year. A number of us have talked about education, and education is key on the supply side of the equation. We do need to educate consumers, and we've been working with a number of the folks here at the table, as well as others, on outreach, talking to policymakers on the federal, state, and local level, even the international level, talking also with the press, and any way we can get the messages out about recycling is not in crisis. Are there challenges? Yes. And we need to point those out, but we also need to talk about what the positive things are that we're doing and where the opportunities are. Another thing we're doing, and Keith sort of touched on it, and certainly Carter and Olivia this morning were great examples of this. We need to talk with the youth. We need to talk to students about recycling, because one of the things we have found over the last 2 years is not only confusion about what goes in the bin, but a loss of confidence in the recycling system, which affects the supply. And so we really need to build that. And one way to do that is to start with the kids, start with all of our sons and daughters, and explain to them what recycling is. And so we have a longstanding actually partnership with an NGO called Jason Learning, have developed K-12 curriculum and are working to get it in schools to spread these messages. Supply side, rather demand side. Demand is really the driver when it comes to recycling. It doesn't matter how much you collect and how good the quality is. If there isn't a demand, if there isn't market demand on the other side, recycling isn't going to happen. And so while there definitely are successes, and if you look especially at the commercial and industrial side of recycling, a lot of successes, but on the residential side, we need to do more work to build up the demand for the kinds of materials that are working its way through the residential stream. And we can do that through partnerships, again, talking to manufacturers, encouraging more use of recycled content. We spend a lot of work on design for recycling initiatives. That's another area. So there are a lot of opportunities here, a lot of things we're all doing, and we're just very, very excited to be here. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Judy.
Hi, my name is Judy Shea. I'm Executive Director at the U.S. Okay. We're doing a little spotlight here. For the U.S. Conference of Mayors, we represent cities of we represent...
Do you want this one? I'm the official microphone passer
Thank
today.
you very much. Let's start this over. Hi, my name is Judy Shea. I'm with the U.S. Conference of Mayors. We represent cities of 30,000 or more, which is 1,400 largest cities in the United States. We also have an environmental affiliate called the Municipal Waste Management Association, made up of the solid waste directors and recycling coordinators for the largest cities. I just want to echo, the mayors have been recycling and having their solid waste people recycle for decades, and it's so good to have everyone else join in the fun of recycling. To be honest, I always used to joke with my mayors, recycling won't get you elected or not elected, but if you do a bad job of it, it will. And so one of the things that we talk a lot about, I mean, my cities have robust recycling goals, they have zero waste goals, they have buy recycle programs. Many times they're doing climate efforts that solid waste is a part of their solution to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they very much care about it. And so, but one of the things that we have found, two things that I like to highlight, is the idea of education and end markets. One, for education, I would put our constituents in four major categories. The ones that are very well informed, pay attention, know what their community recycles, and recycle properly. Then you have the groups who want to recycle, but they're confused. They don't know if X, Y, or Z can be recycled. They get confused by the labeling. They get confused by what their cities will recycle or won't. Then you have the third group of people who want to recycle everything. And so they threw everything into the recycling bin and rely on the MRF to pull things out, which is not the way to do it because you lead to contamination, which makes our end products less valuable. That was a problem with China, but anyone who would like to use our products has to have clean material for it to be fully recycled. And then there's a fourth group that won't recycle at all, no matter what you do. And so, unless you make it so simple for them, and I would say, unfortunately, most people are in that last three categories rather than that first category where they're looking at their recycling labels and knowing exactly what their community recycles. So we do need a robust education program at a national level. Cities only have so much money to educate their consumers. There's constant influx of residents that come in and out of their communities, and so we're very pleased that so many of the private sector people are here, and they're lending their discussion and marketing about recycling. We're very excited about that, and we're also looking for end markets where we have that loop where, because we can only collect so much if no one else buys it. And so we are in, unfortunately, a position of paying more for recyclables, but everything, it's a commodity. And so we are hopeful that this will, that we, as the United States, will become more self-reliant and self-resilient and not be dependent upon foreign markets, and that we can close our loop ourselves. And so I just am very pleased with everyone that's here in this room that we're all part of the solution. And because we need sort of all hands on deck on this situation, it's not as dire as everyone's predicting, but I think we have some hard work, and I think everyone here is dedicated to do that, and so I'm very hopeful.
Great.
Thank you.
So I think you hit on some really great points in the sense that there's a lot of work happening out there. There's a lot of things that people are already doing. You just heard a smidgen of what's going on at our work group levels. And then, of course, the individual organizations all have their own focus and things that they're working on as well. So that's amazing. But you all really integrated a lot of some of the challenges that we are seeing as well. So things that we are looking ahead towards in terms of what we need to do next. What are those areas we really, really need to focus on? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that in terms of what you guys see as the critical needs, gaps, challenges that you see going forward from this point. Perhaps for this kind of framework effort or more broadly in particular. So I'm going to make it easy on you this time, and I'm just going to go from left to right. And I'm going to go down here so I can annoy these people a little bit instead of those people. All right.
Okay.
So Paul.
Needs, challenges that we see going forward. So as we sort of entered this space and started to think about, just imagine PET. We're trying to figure out, well, how do we get it back into our bottles? And when you really take a step back and look at it, there's not enough capacity in the industry there. Our suppliers of resin were essentially virgin resin suppliers. So what I'm seeing happening now is, because of all of these goals that have been established, is there is a push to invest. So our supply base is coming to us. Imagine if you're a virgin resin supplier and my goal is 50% recycled content. That's a demand signal to the business that we're changing direction. And I think what that's starting to spur is really more interest in investment into the infrastructure to create this circular economy. So I think that's one thing that's important. I had a learning also. I was with our global council in Austria and looking at their system. We had the nonprofit CEO came and talked to our global environmental team about it. And what was fascinating is his message to us was how important, which we've already talked about in this panel, educating kids. Their learning was it took generational change in Austria to get people to understand how to connect to the infrastructure that they had, how to understand what to recycle when and where. So his message to us, if you think you're going to fix this in 2 or 3 years, you're kidding yourself. It took a generational change to do it. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind when we look at these frameworks and programs. How do we do that so that we can really embed that for the longer term, so we bring people into a system that's developing as investment comes in, and our children and our children's children know how to use it?
Well, as I've already mentioned education and end markets, one of the other things I'd just like to add is some type of commodity exchange. One of the issues that we found from all the discussions we even had this morning was that there are end markets, and they want our PET, they want our HDPE, they want our fiber, but my communities who operate MRFs might not know about it. And so how do we provide that linkage so that we do it more like a commodity exchange, and we can put people together and create more robust market exchange so that we were able to match up what we collect to the people who want it. So it enhances that closed loop.
Thank you, Judy. So thinking about what local governments see as the challenge, and building on something Judy said upstairs, the contamination rate is high, particularly in single stream recycling. There's outliers, but generally between 15 to 25% are numbers that we're seeing, although there's been some progress over the last year in a lot of different communities. I want to give a particular shout out to Waste Management for seeing a reduction in contamination rates at their MRFs. So what we're seeing is the ship start to turn slowly. The challenge, though, is that it's turning slowly, and local governments think often in one-year terms, in one-year fiscal budgets. And we can't wait, local governments can't wait till 2025 or 2030 to have a perfect recycling system. And so from a need perspective, I think a way to address the challenge is a broader federal voice. And I think it's terrific that the agency today has indicated that they're interested in pursuing national recycling goals. I think national goals focus the mind. They encourage investment. The food waste recycling goal by EPA and the Department of Agriculture 4 years ago is the primary reason why there's so much activity going on in the food waste reduction space. But it's not just about goals. There should also be a louder federal voice on the issue. I heard somebody refer to earlier to a pilot education program around film. There should be a national campaign around contamination. If companies want to get more product, we need national communication about this. We've got a lot of really, really smart people in this room. I know that we can devise this reasonably quickly and make it work. And then lastly, there may be a role for policy here. Okay, we need more investment in infrastructure. I think the current market-based system is good and getting better, but there's a lot of legislation on the Hill that would supply some money in the short term to fill the gap until those goals of 2025 and 2030 come into being. And I think that's an important part of addressing the challenges that we face. Thank you.
So can I just follow up on that comment?
No.
Okay. Because we've heard a lot about the need for investment and in infrastructure. Can you be more specific about what you think, where you think those dollars should be targeted?
Go ahead. You were going to say
or
that? So I think, number one, as we heard at the Recycling Caucus briefing on the Hill on Wednesday, which was just 2 days ago and seems like a week ago, only about 60% of Americans really have access and you're using curbside recycling. That means 40% of the people of the United States, or at least the households, aren't. That is a crying need, okay? That is a primary initial location to make investment in getting the infrastructure so that the people who aren't in the system can be in the system. But investment in education specifically is, I think, very, very important. If we don't educate people on how to recycle right, and I know we all talk about contamination, I travel a lot, and every time I travel, I look in those recycle bins at the airport or at Union Station. My goodness gracious, okay? We need to do a better job on public space recycling, so investment is needed there. I could go on, but I know Keith has something she wants to share.
Thank you, David. So I agree with everything that's been said up until this point, except for one thing David said. You said there might be a role for policy. I insist that there is a need for policy, and here's why. Our research shows us that if we want to level up the U.S. recycling system, if we need to get a first step, before we can educate a public, they have to be able to do it. And only half of Americans can recycle at home as easily as they can throw something away. What year is it that is the truth? So we have to make sure that everyone can do that. So if we level up the U.S. recycling system, everyone can do it as easily or easier than throwing something away. Every community has the trucks they need, the staff they need, like the basic leveling up. Before you even operate this U.S. recycling system for 1 minute, we've got a $9+ billion price tag to get there. How much do you all have in your wallet right now? Is it anywhere close to $9 billion? So we've got a gap between what we've all been working our careers for and where we need to go. And so I think policy helps us bridge the gap. And I think I want to add 3 specific things that I think we could change. One, we need to address the fact that if we are truly committed to advancing a circular economy in this country, and a circular economy means that this is not make to waste, but that we are making things with the intent for the molecules to stay in motion, that this applies to paper, to metals, to glass, and to plastics, as well as everything else in a household. Let's talk textiles, let's talk electronics, let's talk food waste. Then we better do some serious figuring of what can we deliver. So 3 ways that we could really make a change. One is we need to stop and look at what are landfill costs in this country. On average, they are half the cost for a community to recycle. So if we're truly committed to a circular economy, but then we have price disparity with where we prioritize landfilling, I think we need to stop and ask ourselves, is that really the path? Step 2, we really need to look at the operational costs from our communities. Community costs are doubling and tripling. Communities are paying, if your cost to do something doubled or tripled overnight, and you were suddenly faced with multi-million dollars to do, a cost to do the right thing, but you can't afford it, you might hate it, but what's your choice? You get stuck. So that's point 2 that I think we really need to dig into, and it won't be a fun conversation, but we have to. And then the final one is, we are hearing more and more that producers of products want to be engaged, need to be engaged, but they need a level playing field, trusted partners, and some sort of consistency about how to be engaged. And so the last piece is really a platform for producers all across the supply chain to really steer the effective modern advancement of the circular economy.
I agree with what everyone has said, but I would also just qualify or add another element of what's needed to what Keith said in terms of access, that the public needs greater access to recycling. It's got to be more than just access. Because, and I mentioned this earlier, but there is definitely a crisis in terms of public confidence in recycling. And I see it with my mother in terms of when she's done with the plastic 2-liter bottle, and it just doesn't matter where I put it. We can just put it in the waste trash can. I'm like, no. Do you know what I do for a living? No. and she's just one example. Last year at American Recycles Day, KAB did a great panel on this subject, and we heard loud and clear the message about the problems with people not understanding and thinking that it really all goes to the landfill. And so the truth is that the only voice that can really help us put that to bed, or one of the unique voices, is the federal voice. It's US EPA actually coming out and saying the positive things and the good things that are happening in recycling and the extent of recycling. And we need the help to bring us all together to talk about that and for EPA to get that message out. Another thing that we need EPA's voice for, and this is really critical, and Bruce actually touched on it this morning in the executive roundtable, which is that part of giving people confidence in the system is telling them what the system does. That recycling is actually producing feedstock material for manufacturing. These are commodities. The reason why quality is important is because we're not throwing it in the trash. We're taking valuable commodity material, we're processing it to a specification grade to be used by manufacturers. Worldwide, 40% of manufacturing feedstock comes from recyclable materials, scrap materials. And so we need to call the material what it is, which is a recyclable commodity. It is not waste. And we've all been doing it here. We throw around the term waste all the time. We're not waste recycling. And it's not disposal, it's recycling. And we need a loud message from EPA that states that loud and clear to communities, to the public, through regulation, I dare say. It's absolutely critical in terms of what we all do. We also need to not just define what's recyclable, but put that into practice. There are FTC guidelines, but I know that needs a revisit. And so I really would hope that into 2020, one of the focuses of the work that we all do here in partnership with EPA is looking at what does it really mean for something to be recyclable. It's not just that it's, in a lab, it's technologically possible to recycle that, but it's economically feasible. And what does that mean? And how do we get that message out? So that's important. And then we've touched on, and one of the groups mentioned demand challenge. We critically need a federal or national demand challenge that crosses all commodities to really challenge, not mandate, but to challenge and strongly encourage manufacturers, packaging companies to use greater recycled content, and also to design for recycling. Actually, David mentioned the State of Recycling briefing that we held on Capitol Hill on Wednesday, and we talked a lot about the design for recycling opportunities. ISRI's also been working with different offices on the Hill on trying to find ways to create tax incentives even for manufacturers who use greater recycled content. So there's a lot of things working all together we can do to incentivize the market side, the demand side of the equation.
So I think when we think about critical needs, from our perspective, I think it's really around harmonization and infrastructure. And I think the example from the markets working group upon definition of just recycling. I mean, it's incredible how sort of fractured we are still, and we've been having all these conversations for years. But when we start thinking about how to really achieve economies of scale and make recycling work better in America, I think harmonizing these systems, harmonizing our rules is a really important place to start. I mean, even in the same community, one of those 20,000 that Keith talks about, if you live in a single family home versus a multifamily home versus an office building in the same place versus public space, the rules are totally different about what you're supposed to put in your recycle bin and where it goes. And so of course consumers are really confused and are causing contamination. And so if we're to really achieve economies of scale and get more of this really valuable packaging material back into that circular economy, I think starting to think about how to harmonize our systems is the right place to think about that. And then when we think about how that ties into infrastructure, you know, one of the reasons that we have a patchwork of systems for recycling is because we have a patchwork of technology and infrastructure, right? Some communities have really state-of-the-art facilities that are currently running under capacity, right? They can't get enough feedstock. The states of North and South Carolina have done a really great job, this really cool public service campaign, Your Bottles Mean Jobs, trying to get more South Carolinians and North Carolinians to put their recyclables in the bin to generate jobs and income into the economy because they don't have enough feedstock. Other communities don't have as nearly technologically advanced systems and, you know, can't handle the new kinds of packaging that are on the in the marketplace and can't achieve those economies of scale. So I think the two are really, really importantly linked. And I think there is some good movement at the federal level in this space from funding and finding ways to improve infrastructure domestically. Here, I think the Save Our Seas Act, there's an entire section of that piece of legislation which just saw progress this week that goes to funding infrastructure improvements domestically. But again, I think this harmonization piece is so critical if we're really going to get scale and start to collect the volume of packaging material that we need.
So I'll bookend what Bruce started with about generational change. And while I think that's very true and it does take generation to change things, I also think what we've seen in the last couple of years around the attention on this issue is like nothing I've seen in the last 20 years. So I believe that we are in a moment where we both can kind of show significant movement on this in the next couple of years. And I think we have to, or we'll lose our license to really work on this issue in a intentional and significant way. And so I hope, I'd urge us all to really, that we have a couple years to show big progress on a very specific issue that might feel complex to us, but is way less amorphous than a lot of other issues that we're facing. And so now's the time. And in addition to all the really great ideas that I've heard across the table, a couple things that I feel like I can add here in the end is one, with everybody here and in the spirit of collaboration and partnership, I think we really need a vision of what we're building towards. What does the system look like 10, 15 years from now? I feel like oftentimes in this industry, we're responding to we're kind of building for 10 years ago. And this is the opportunity for us to show that this country is on kind of the front end of the economic construct for the next 50 years. So let's take that opportunity and let's see what are we actually trying to build towards. What does the system look like 10 and 15 years from now? And I think that's just a really big opportunity that we have here. The second and last thing I'll mention is that I think I feel like I'm oftentimes in rooms where we're, building from scratch tools to solve a problem. And I think there's a lot of really great tools that we can leverage from other industries. And if we're thinking about, the role that government can play in this, if we look to a neighboring issue of renewable energy, there's been a lot of evening out in the market that's been happening. And I think that the government, federal and regional governments, have played a significant role in building and kind of defining the market that we want to build towards and creating market tools to help drive that. And so I'm hoping that we can leverage some of the experience from other issue areas where we've seen some kind of market evenness be built and reduce risk for investors and others to play at scale in those markets. And I think that this is the next opportunity to do that.
Great, thank you. Lots of interesting and interconnected challenges there. And I'm really glad that you ended on the urgency note, because I think that's a challenge that we have, right? We've got all these big problems that we need to solve, but there is a certain level of urgency. We've got cities that are sitting on materials. We've got unmet demand out there, which, how do we connect those people now? So, which is the nice thing about some of what's been happening over the last year is that we've been able to try to make some movement forward on some of these issues. And I think the clearinghouse will be a great next step in terms of bringing a lot of that information together to at least start that messaging that we need to do so badly. And so I'm gonna kind of break here and go to some of our questions before we get to the very last question that I'm going to ask you. And so we've heard a lot of talk about the need for national action in certain areas. And so one of the things that has come up is this idea of a national goal that should be simple and clear, right? And so, but I'm curious to know how that helps either your organizations or the communities that you're in to have a national goal. I mean, you know, you've got states that have lots of goals that are being pushed down to the local level. You've got local communities that have their own goals. You've got organizations that are making their goals. So what does a national goal mean for those organizations and those municipalities? Robin.
I'll just state very concisely what it does for me is it raises awareness. It just sends a message loud and clear about the importance of recycling. So from that alone, it's very important. It's critical.
Okay. Yeah, David.
I think the other thing a national goal does is it eliminates or greatly reduces this patchwork we have all across the country with different goals in different places, and we have a completely national focus on recycling that is heretofore missing. And so I think that we would be better off with a better microphone.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Glad it wasn't just me.
I was at the end of my remarks. I think that a national goal, again, focuses attention, as Robin said, on recycling in a way that a goal coming out of Sacramento, Albany, or Richmond, Virginia simply doesn't. And it attracts attention. It'll help focus us on the problem, it'll help focus us on the solutions, and it will galvanize both public and private investment into addressing the challenges that we face today.
This is my job.
You're doing excellent.
I just want to clarify one thing, which is I think that it has to come with education, though, at the same time, because what you don't want to do is just create more wish cycling in order to meet the goal. So we have to be careful in order not to do any backsliding on quality issues and contamination, that we also at the same time use as an opportunity to remind people about what goes in the bin and what doesn't go in the bin. That's absolutely critical to any sort of goal that's set.
Yeah, you know, just one more thing, really all piling on the goal comment, but I think it also sends a signal that this is a critical issue to the federal government and at the highest levels of leadership in the U.S. GMA put out a report this week that shows that the vast majority of Americans think that the federal government should really lead on this issue, akin to the leadership they showed to launch the Apollo space mission, right? So this is really important to Americans, and they really think that the federal government should play an outsized leadership role, and I think the first step is setting a direction of where we're trying to get to.
Great.
But just cautionary. I'm all for national goals as long as it's not an unfunded mandate that goes with it or punishment to go with it. We don't need that at the local level. We need partners, not prosecutors. We would like to work hand in hand in order to get to those goals. But we know that it can't just be simply stating a goal and then Big Brother saying you have to do that.
Right. I agree with that. In the waste sector, we often sometimes say no ban without a plan. The same concept applies to a goal. It can't just be a goal that we require people to implement and then there's punishment if you don't. We need to give them tools, we need to give them resources, and we need to give them guidance on how to help achieve that goal.
And I would just add, within a business, right now our goals around recycling and recovery are one of the top 3 goals of our CEO. And when that's a goal that's stated that way, rest assured there's somebody that works for him that's calling my business unit president saying, how are you doing on it today? And that fosters action. And I think if you have a national goal, we talked about this earlier in the executive roundtable, I think Monique brought it up, that it should be simple enough that people they get it. I think we always run afoul of something that's really good, really complicated, and everybody scratches their head. My watchword was always, if I can explain it to my mom and dad, and they go, oh yeah, I get it, that's a good thing. So we have to be clear, simple, but it has to be something that fosters the right actions. But I think it would be useful if done right.
Okay, great. So, and somebody was referring to the playbook concept. So it's a goal with a playbook. So it's got the resources, it's got the educational tools, and all the other stuff that goes along with it to help you implement. Great. Next question. What do you think is the number one thing every community should do today to strengthen recycling for 2020 and beyond? So what is the number one thing every community should do?
Every community to what? To strengthen?
To strengthen recycling for 2020 and beyond.
Ready?
Sure.
So I would like, Wendy Worley is sitting right there. Wendy, will you raise your hand? She runs the state recycling program for North Carolina, and Richard Chesley and Chantel Fryer are here from South Carolina. And I think they would have an answer for every county and every city in their state. And having worked with that one and lived in that one, I think the answer is this is not something that cities can solve on their own, that they need the system to be delivered. And this discussion about a goal is like the first step towards trying to get out of the reactive response that Bridget mentioned. That's what recycling is now, when there's a big enough pile of like stuff that some entrepreneur can figure out how to turn into something new, then it happens. But that is not something that a city can drive, that is not something that a county can drive, that is something that they can participate in. So I would say that the number one thing that our community partners, and we have more than 1,300 of them in multiple states that we work in partnership with, are asking for is, can you please make it consistent? Can you let us know where we're working? And then, so that we know that we're not alone, and that we have some backing, so that we can fund this, because recycling is on the back. I love this supply chain discussion. That is absolutely right. Like, recycling develops feedstocks for manufacturing. We only get the environmental impacts when the economic ones work. So we need to make the economics right for communities.
Yeah. Can I just, just to be obnoxious and add a little bit to what Keith said, I feel like I'd reframe the question from what can cities or municipalities do for themselves. I would say, wherever you sit in the system, what can you do for a different part of the system to help them advance that piece of it?
Can I say amen to that? Because I mean, my city's already trying to do robust recycling goals. They're already trying to educate their consumers. They need assistance. They need help. They need robust buy recycled campaigns. They need everyone from the top down to purchase recycled content material, so it encourages more product stewardship and more people to help close the loop, so that we have a price tag for our collected recyclables that's worth something, that evens out, so it's not cheaper to landfill than to recycle. We would like those commodities to be worth something, so that it balances and we can enhance our education efforts. Okay, about that.
Yeah, and I would just add also, I think probably the most important thing is have a conversation across the recycling chain. So the municipality with the recycler, with the manufacturers in the community, et cetera, so that, because there's no panacea here. There isn't one thing that's going to solve all of these challenges we're talking about. It's got to be a number of parts of the system that work together, have a constant conversation, and identify priorities for that community and work together to solve them. And that's where, again, I'll just put another plug in for what EPA is doing here, because it's through this dialogue where we're all working together, we're also making connections. I know that, just speaking for ISRI, we've just in the last 2 weeks have done a program in South Carolina on market demand. We've worked on the national level with David with the MRF Summit. We can't do it on our own. These aren't one-offs. We need to have the conversation.
Just to add one more thing with this new microphone that may or may not be working. If there was one thing that I would want all communities to be telling their citizens that we haven't heard yet today, it's that recycling isn't free. Recycling costs money. We need to educate people that waste and recycling is not a free service. And recycling in particular costs money, because part of the problem is that for a variety of reasons, we've sort of trained some people that recycling is free, and it's not. And we're paying the price for that now because of the changes in the commodity markets.
Great. All right, next question. So going from the community level to the international level, what role do international organizations play in tackling recycling challenges here in the U.S.? So what's the international connection to all this, if any?
So in 2 weeks, I'm headed to Stockholm for a Ellen MacArthur meeting. Ellen MacArthur Foundation is advancing the circular economy across the planet, and they understand that a global goal needs a federal or a country-specific approach. The same way that a federal goal needs a hyper-local approach. So I think that there's a lot that goes, just as much work that goes up on a global level as goes down on a community level. And I know, Robin, you travel internationally a lot.
How much time do we have? A couple of thoughts here. First of all, I agree completely with Keith, and we were very pleased to be part of the discussion that occurred with a number of the folks in this room and the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the Plastics Pact. And so I think that working with some of the thought leaders and the influencers on the international level and bringing it here locally is important. I think if I could just there's a very important principle I think we all need to understand. We talk about demand, how important market demand is. It's a global economy. We're not going backwards. It's a global supply chain. So as much as we want to invest locally and create more market demand at home, which we absolutely need to do, and the recycling industry and many other partners in this room are making that investment here in the US, we also need to realize that there's always going to be the flow of the material internationally. The markets may shift, and they certainly have over the last 2 years. But given the global economy and how goods are manufactured today, we need to recognize that that's going to happen. So market access globally is critical. So working with international organizations that affect that market access is important. And the other reason why it's important is because so many of the organizations, even in this room, especially the brands and manufacturers, are global entities. And we don't want to set standards, whether they be recycled content standards or any other standards that vary considerably from one geographic region to another. That just makes all of our jobs much more difficult. And so, and my experience when I do travel globally is that there is a lot of confusion out there, even with other government entities, and it's because we're sending mixed messages and we have mixed standards, and we have differing specs that we use, different requirements, and as much we can make that consistent by having that conversation across government lines, the better off we all are.
I think as a global brand, one of the things that we saw as we created our goal, I remember all the hair pulling and shrieking when we set our targets, because you're looking at geographies that have no infrastructure, some better than we have by a lot. And what we learned in the process and the regular routine that we have is that there's some great things being done in different places that you can't just close your eyes and say, well, we don't do it like that here. And so we've kind of broken down some of those internal barriers to really saying, you know, there's some things in Europe that do really well. And when we look at the broader policy space, we have really a whole buffet of policy moves that have been made all over the world that we can pick and choose from. So there's good and bad, but I think what we've learned in the process is that there's so many good things going on that we can adopt in other places. And we have to get that idea of a framework, just like we talked about earlier this morning here. What's the framework that we're going to go to? We have a base set of definitions that we argued over for 12 months, but now we're all on the same page. And I think because it's international, it's a little bit more solid than if we just invented it in individual locations.
Right. Great. And that could be something that the clearinghouse thinks about too. How are we integrating some of those international examples into that clearinghouse to learn from those situations too? All right. Another question. What do you think is the single most misunderstood aspect of recycling right now? Pizza boxes. That's right.
Pizza boxes.
Yeah.
Badgers. Well done, Chantal. Yay.
We love the single most question here.
I know. It's a lot of...
So I think that I think the good thing is that there are a lot of questions. So media is asking a lot of questions. They're trying to really get to the heart of it, and it's kind of gone from, you know, the beginning phases of why aren't citizens doing more to wait a minute, the system isn't really working. Wait a minute, you know, like I feel like the questions are really really, it's spurring along, and we're doing a lot of work to answer those questions. So on Tuesday, I did a satellite media tour, and if you've done these before in recycling, like, it's great. You usually get 3 or so and you knock them out. I did 21 in a row. That was a lot, but everyone had the same question. Every reporter was like, what's the number one thing we're doing wrong? And it's 1, don't bag your recyclables. 2, I talked about how pizza boxes are recyclable and pizza is not, over and over again. But I think it really it shows the heart and soul that citizens have, that broadcasters have, that communities have. Like, they want to solve it, but it's bigger than what they can solve. So I think that I think it's more than one thing, and if we keep looking for the silver bullet, well, we've missed it, and we have no time to waste.
And I think that there is a lot of talk about plastics, which is a really important conversation, but I think something that is misunderstood, and this is not the one thing, but is a thing, is that there's a lot of plastic waste, and there's a lot of other material in the recycling stream that if we don't solve for the whole basket, the economics just don't work. So the need to ensure that there is a cost to collecting and processing material, and that material comes in a collective, just like your shopping basket, and then it gets sorted out into separate commodities that have value. And any commodity that it costs more to process than it does than there's value for that material is dragging down the whole set of materials. So in so much as we have a challenge with our fiber markets and our glass markets, we're not able to spend on innovating on solutions on the plastic challenges. So the integration of the system and the economics needing to work across that whole system is something that I think is misunderstood.
Just to add, we heard a lot about plastics, and what I'm going to mention isn't the most misunderstood, but it's increasing in importance, and that's the fact that American consumers continue to throw out batteries in recycling, and batteries are often made out of flammable material called lithium ion that are causing fires all over the United States in MRFs and in garbage trucks. And that threatens the industry because it becomes very difficult to get insurance when your facilities keep catching on fire. And we need to do a better job of engaging with the battery manufacturers, some of whom may be in this room, I don't know. But more importantly, we need to engage the American consumer and get batteries out of curbside.
And Bruce, or Judy? And
I'll just add real quick.
Yeah.
I think one of the most misunderstood, if it has a chasing arrow, it's automatically recyclable. And so they throw it in the recycling bin, or my wannabe recyclers who want to throw everything in, including like the compostable bowls that they get at the woke vending carts, but will contaminate the rest of your recycling bins. So that's one of our biggest issues.
And I think one of the things that I always struggle with is right now we're reacting to pressures and pictures and things like that, and I'm fully behind recycling, but I think we're going to have to make sure that we look at these things in the broader sustainability context. So if you make a choice on a material, there's also a carbon footprint implication, there's potentially a water implication, and so on and so forth, so that ultimately the day is going to come when we're going to have to make decisions based on 4 or 5 levers, and 3 of them may be good and they're green, and 2 of them may be yellow or red. And we're going to have to make choices, but I think that it's ultimately going to get to a place where we're going to have to think a little more broadly.
Great.
I think as the last one on the chain, I think the number one most common thing that's misunderstood is whose fault it is. Right? I mean, we spend a lot of time, oh no, it's recycling doesn't work because of consumers, or recycling doesn't work because of CPG, or recycling doesn't work for whatever. There's a lot of finger pointing that's gone on in the conversation, and I think your point earlier about no industry, no sector in that circular economy can solve this alone, right? And no one is solely responsible. Right. And so I think when we start to actually advance real solutions, like some of the work that the EPA led work has done over the years, that it has to be this collective effort, and there's no silver bullet, but we have to work together.
And actually, building on that, I would just say quickly that, and this is going to sound really funny coming from me representing the recycling industry, but recycling is not the solution. It's part of the solution to a lot of the challenges that we're facing with regard to plastics and so many other issues. And if we build it up too much, then it's always going to be in crisis or failing. And so we have to be very clear about that. And the other issue, and sort of related to that, is the fallacy that recycling again is broken or it's in crisis. Again, there are challenges, and but it is not broken. There's huge successes happening in the recycling industry, and also what we're talking about here is it's, believe it or not, a small segment of recycling. We're talking about residential recycling here, which is less than 30% of the recycling activity that happens in the U.S. and has been happening for well before 1980, when we had our first bin placed at the end of the driveway. So there's a lot more vibrancy with regard to recycling, and we don't talk about it a lot, but I think that's something that has to come out more as well.
Great. Okay, just a reminder, if you do have questions, send them in through the system here. The name of that message is Super Planet 589, not S89, just in case you can't read it. So, all right. So we had a couple more questions, but thank you for putting that in a little bit more context in terms of, we're very focused on the recycling topic right now, but it is not the only answer to a lot of the problems that we've all been identifying here. And I would like to nominate the pizza box as the polar bear of the recycling campaign, because that is one challenge that we've got. So the next question that we have is, what role can regional organizations play in supporting national recycling efforts? So we talked a little bit about the state and local level. We've talked a little bit about the national level. What about kind of in between there in terms of regions? How is that working, and what can be done there to enhance national efforts? Yeah.
Just helping share the message, the consistent message that we're trying to send out on the importance of recycling, how to recycle right. These are valuable commodities. All of these messages, they need to be pushed out on every level.
I think what we see from CERDIC, the Southeast Recycling Development Council, and NERC, the Northeast one, is an ability to understand the economic landscape in a different way, to profile end users, to really show the dynamic nature of the industry. We will also work closely with every state recycling organization and every head of state recycling office, because it is a hyper-local, it is a regional effort, but I think the economic piece has been seen as a successful connector there.
I would also just add that, and Megan brought this up earlier, and I know Keith, your team works on this a lot, is just, I think the regional level is a great place to work on harmonization. It's not always possible, like there's different, challenges locally and at the national level, but regionally, there is some possibility for harmonization in regions that have similar kind of economics and cultural similarities.
Looking at you, New England.
In the late 1980s into the early 1990s, when RCRA Subtitle D came out and began to be implemented, we saw in a lot of states multiple counties get together and form regional waste authorities. And so there is already a system in some states for regionalization, and I would suggest that part of our challenge here today is to make sure that those authorities are on board with what we're doing, because that way you get to touch more people through your communications, through your education, et cetera.
And I think the value of regional organizations too, and when I look at different policy positions that might be state-based, I think the reality of materials and end markets and material flow is such that you can't expect to have viable end markets in every state in the union functioning independently with the boundaries being the walls around the state. I think regional makes a lot more sense sometimes, because you can get economies of scale, look at shipping and a whole host of other factors. So there's a place for that, I think, in this whole conversation.
It's difficult because all these cities have their own jurisdiction, their own, but I mean, definitely a regional approach. I'm just thinking like the greater Chicagoland area is made up of 270 different municipalities. This area that we're in right now, probably if you go from the jurisdiction of DC versus Rockville, Alexandria, Arlington, all recycle different things, all have. And so if myself, who's pretty up on recycling, realizes I have to recycle differently in DC than I do in Arlington, and I understand the stuff. I can't imagine the confusion. So there needs to probably be better coordination. But once again, sometimes local governments are kind of at their wits' end as to and they don't always work. But I agree with the economies of scale and trying to, and there are some examples where you pool your resources together in order to sell your products, and that probably would be a better approach. So.
Great. And so sort of related to this, is there anything that can be done to improve the recycling process in tribal and rural communities? So we've talked a little bit about cities, municipalities. What about those really rural communities? We talked a little bit about economies of scale to maybe going to a regional level. So what other thoughts do you have in terms of those communities?
Access, right? I mean, if it's access. And I grew up in rural Vermont. We didn't have curbs, is the joke that we like to use a lot, right? So no curbside recycling. So we drive our trash and recycling to the transfer station, and there are people there who will instruct you on how to do it correctly and shame you publicly if you don't. But that's something that my family had to do. It would take time out of our week. Fortunately, our transfer facility was relatively close by, but I think, in many parts of the country and in tribal areas, those distances to travel are incredibly far, right? And those are hours out of people's days. We even see that in California, that we know that some people have to drive over 100 miles to get to their closest bottle redemption center. And so, if we start to think about how to improve our infrastructure and how to harmonize these systems, I think access, geographically reasonable, right, access in rural communities is really important.
And I think we need to come back to who is paying for this. If local governments and tribal communities are paying for this, and they have to haul it, and we already understand that landfills are even cheaper in very rural areas. So if we start off with an economic disparity, and then we begin to expand transportation on top of that, we run the limits of the system. And so I come back to what I've said before, but what if they can't fix it? What if it's not their job to fix? Like, what if their job is to say, we would love to participate in this. This is essential for our health and well-being as a community. However, it is not in our grasp, and we need help. And I think, again, this is a role that EPA could really lead on.
I think, we have this tendency to think about bigger is better and more mechanized, which I think, in the actual sorting and processing part of the system and even in the collection side. And I think that's not always going to be the model that works. It's not going to be economically viable in all markets, especially less dense markets. And so some of the things we're looking at on the innovation side are models for actually smaller kind of mini MRFs that are actually more manual or may leverage robotics that are lower cost that could be better, can be right sized to a different kind of market. It's just one example. There may be hub and spoke models as well, but the models that work in New York City and economically are, and even in like a Memphis or a DC or elsewhere, aren't going to work economically in some of these other, in some of these more rural regions. And so we need to look at what are the models in those regions. There may even be kind of distributed models. So that's something where I think innovation could support the system as well.
And I would just add that this is a space where we're talking about how we innovate, how we do it. And it's going to be things like thinking through freight lanes. So I know my logistics guys pull their hair out when they have to come back with an empty truck. So I think it's going to be really looking at, well, how do you connect the dots with different ways of bringing materials back, taking the air out of it. I like that we've talked about the mini MRFs, but think too about other areas like island economies. It's a whole different ballgame, and we can't use the technologies and methods that we're used to because they're designed for big cities and high population density. So I think there's a whole host of innovation that's going to have to take place to really grasp that rural solution. And it'll probably be many solutions that fit just local conditions.
Great. All right, do we have one more question? Okay. All right, one more question, and then we'll do our wrap-up question, and then we'll move on. What important research areas do you see to improve recycling? So what is the research that needs to be done these days?
Yes. Yeah, what isn't? Consumer behavior is still, so we work, we have lots of city partners, and in our recent work with the city of Denver, we see communities, citizens rolling out their trash cart and rolling out their recycling cart and half of their aluminum cans are in the trash can. Why is that? This is a green city, a passionate, I mean, they're obviously taking the time to move the cart out. So I think consumer behavior, we have some recent funding that's going to allow us to dig deep into that, but that also has to be matched with the more system-changing stuff of how do we work on the disparity between like virgin plastic prices and recycled content? How do we work on the disparity, the economic disparity? Where do you inject some sort of change in the system that doesn't just root everyone out, but that advances the system forward?
I'm not the research expert at SWANA, but we recently issued a research report about how communities across the United States are responding to the challenges currently in the commodities market. One of the recommendations in there was that local governments should consider changing whether they do curbside collection, on a weekly basis, and go to every other week, because that simple move reduces the cost and gets you much closer to break even in a down commodity market. There's a lot of areas that need research. We don't pretend to have all the answers, and it's a great place for collaboration. And so I look forward to working with EPA and the folks on the panel and you in the room on developing those research topics.
Like we have been saying, recycling is a market, and so for an economic system. And so for anyone who runs a business in this room, and you think about your manufacturing, if sometimes you were buying inputs to your manufacturing that was like 60% of what you wanted and 40% what you don't want, you'd be like, absolutely not, take it back, this doesn't work for my system. We have high efficiencies in other kinds of manufacturing. And so I think we need better understanding of bale yields and what is actually coming out of bales and MRFs. And I think there's an opportunity, and some of us in the industry are already having conversations about how to leverage both technology and the systems that exist today to create some better specifications around kind of what's coming out of the MRF and what's in that bale, so that it's really clear. And there's a lot of technology coming down the pike that will help improve understanding of yields.
I think one of the things that I would think about in terms of research, in the food and beverage industry, traceability is really important in one direction. So if you produce it, it goes to the consumer and there's something wrong, you want to know where did it go to. But I think with things like blockchain, I'm really interested in thinking, well, where does all this stuff go? So the 50% that Keith is worried about from the homes, where's it going and why? I think there's blockchain and all these other tools out there haven't really been leveraged to look at that traceability in both directions. And I think, a build on some of the visual tools to look at when a city does a bale study, it could take forever. Is there a way to do a quick look using visual technology to look at something and at least get an assessment of how, what the quality of that bale may or may not be?
Life cycle analysis. I would like many of my mayors have made climate change goals. For example, they want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, if a recyclable has to be hauled 1,000 miles, maybe that is not the best use of a greenhouse. That might be an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And we have to make sort of logical decisions about the entire picture. Related to that is also, though, product to product. I love the fact that an aluminum can be put in a recycling bin, and 21 or 27 days later, it is back to being a aluminum can. And so I know there are some limitations for example, plastics that you know better than I. Like you can't go from a Coca-Cola to another Coca-Cola because of the exposure to food, etc. Is there some research that could be done in order to make that clean enough so that it can be used from food to food or product to product, so that so it's easier for you, for the end consumer or end product developers to have something that it's easier to recyclable and to reuse over and over again.
Yeah, and I would just add to that there's been a lot of innovations and technological improvements over the last several years in processing technology, but certainly there's always room for more. And to create greater yields, reduce contamination, et cetera. There's also opportunities in terms of innovations to help with the design of products to make them more recyclable, as well as one of the things I heard in the last couple of months, which sort of surprised me, to be honest, is the perception still on the part of even some manufacturers that to use recyclable material in manufacture actually is to use a lower grade or a lower quality material, and that isn't the case. And to the extent that it may be a case for a certain product, there needs to be some research done in order to find out why and how do we actually strengthen that recyclable product so there isn't a loss in quality at all. And I know that there's research being done in a number of public and private partnerships. The Department of Energy has their Remade program that I know Isri and a lot of us in the room are part of, where where they're focused on sustainable manufacturing, including recycling. But there's perhaps a role that EPA could play in terms of challenging universities to add even into their curriculum design for recycling, and a recycling curriculum to challenge engineers to look at this issue as part of their regular curriculum. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Great. Excellent ideas. All right. You guys have been awesome. Last question for you all. We've got a lot of new people in the room in terms of having not been involved with this process for the past year and some of these conversations. What advice or what suggestions would you have for them on how to or what to get engaged in this process moving forward? How can they best utilize their time and contribute to this process? Thoughts about that?
Engage. Just participate, engage. One of the best things, again, about what EP has done over the last year is they've brought us together. And there are so many entities that are in this space, and everyone brings unique perspective, unique expertise. And so it's fascinating to make new connections here and to learn who may be out there to partner with or to work with. And by getting involved in the work groups, I think that's a great opportunity to start right there.
So for those of you who are new to the team, welcome to the team. My first recommendation would be to really read the framework. Really read it and understand what's in it, and then identify one or two things in there that your organization can get engaged with. For some of you, it's going to be markets. For some of you, it's going to be infrastructure. I think that's a place where people who are new can engage in a way that's productive. And I'm going to go off topic for a second and suggest that we're talking about recycling. And what we seem to not remember is that there's a waste hierarchy that was mentioned earlier in passing. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Let's not forget that we need to reduce the amount of waste that we generate. Today in the United States, we're going to generate 1 million tons of garbage, close to it. Not all of it's going to get recycled, and certainly not all of it's going to get recycled properly. So while we're working on fixing the recycling system, improving the recycling system, and again, congratulations to EPA on leading us here, I respectfully suggest we also need to be looking at how to reduce waste generation.
I'd echo what David said.
Okay.
We have the responsibility cannot all be left to local governments or waste management and then trying to find commodity. I mean, we're all in this together. The idea, if we produce less waste, it's less to recycle. If we figure out a better way of having an open loop or closed loop recycling, that's great. I would strongly recommend, particularly our private sector partners, to talk with your designers and your marketers. I've been doing this for way too long. And one of the issues we used to have, we had problem materials, and we would talk to that manufacturer, and they're going, well, you know, the marketer thought that looked pretty, and and I'm like, okay, that's fine, but if you don't think about the end use of that product, we're in trouble. I mean, because then we're trying to recycle blue glass and green glass and purple glass and whatever. maybe we need to design with recycling in mind, and that would be, or design with, better yet, reduction of the amount of waste we produce. So I just want to thank everyone for stepping forward and committing themselves to this. This is fantastic, and so I appreciate the fact that we're not in this all by ourselves anymore, that there's a wide-ranging set of stakeholders that are all bellying up to the table and committing themselves. So that's, so welcome on board. We're very nice, usually, and so welcome.
So I think the first thing I want to acknowledge is that we're all super busy and have a lot to do. so I appreciate, that everyone is engaging at some level. And if I were to think about advice I'd give myself is, very basic 80-20 rule. It's like, where do you have where's your sphere of influence? And what is most material to your organization, to your business, wherever you sit? I often see the things that I cringe at a little bit are where a company or someone will do something that is really interesting and a great story, but is so immaterial to their business and doesn't really game change kind of what they're doing integrated into their core business model. And I know that, we all sit in different sectors, so I mean that across government, business, the public, other, NGOs, et cetera. And know that there's a lot of resources out there that are working on things, and that, where can you be a leader and where can you kind of garner or push support, but not have to embed a lot of your own personal time and energy.
Yeah, so clear your calendar, because working on recycling is an unbelievable amount of work. But I agree. I think, take time to familiarize yourself with what is happening, and then identify where you can add, your organization can add the most specific value. Because I think with so much energy around this space right now, we are running the risk of duplicating work or, sort of spinning our wheels in sort of duplication and other efforts, new efforts on top of new efforts. So taking some time to familiarize yourself with what is going on, and then thinking about what your value add is, what your organization's value add is, will go a really long way.
I would just add, and I agree with all the previous comments made, I'm kind of a visual guy. If you want to get into this space, go visit a MRF. It'll change your life. Go out ahead of the recycling trucks. Keith made us go out and look inside, which is very interesting at 5 o'clock in the morning. Some of the things move that are in there. But go immerse yourself in what this reverse logistics supply chain looks like, because it really starts to inform, the fact that we get some materials out of it sometimes is amazing, but it'll really tell you what the local conditions look like, and it'll make an indelible impression on you.
So I can't stress enough that partnership is what this is all about. Don't try to go it alone, do it with more. Second, I'd invite you to invite every emerging environmental scientist or packaging designer or anyone in the space. We need an influx of young minds and energy into this. And then finally, have a zero tolerance for greenwashing. Everything we do must advance us towards our North Star. At the Recycling Partnership, our North Star is making sure that recycling is one piece, but really we're working towards preventing climate change. And so what is our North Star? And action is action is the antithesis of greenwashing. And so I encourage us to have a zero tolerance for that.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's give them all a hand. Turning it back over to you.
Thank you to our panelists for a very lively, very informative discussion, and thanks to all of you for many of you for all the work that you've done over the past year, and thank you in advance for the work that you'll do in the coming year to advance the national framework for recycling in the United States and to help EPA work on the development of national goals. I'd like to thank the administrator for your leadership. This is something EPA obviously doesn't have to do, but it's important, and your support is tremendous. It was your idea to have the innovation fair. Actually, I should say more than innovate. It was more than an idea when it comes from the administrator, but But it was certainly an idea, and just to illustrate, though, what I'm very grateful for is the great colleagues that I have who took that idea and then developed the innovation fair without a lot of parameters and made it really into a terrific event, and who of course also worked very hard on making this event so productive, in addition to all the work they've done over the course of the year to work with so many of you in the development of the framework that, again, we hope that you look on online, that you pick up a copy on, and that, as recommended by the last panel, that you help work on, again, as we strengthen the recycling system in the United States. So again, as you go back home and across the country, please take back to your companies and your communities the hopeful message that we heard today over and over again from today's speakers, that recycling in the United States is strong. There's plenty of opportunity for us to do more to work together to make it even stronger. And again, thank you so much for being here.